The scream that tore through the Otukpo compound that night could be heard down the street. Neighbors came running with lanterns and wrappers tied tightly around their chests. "What happened?" one woman shouted, pushing through the crowd gathering at the door. Cecilia was on the floor, holding Ochanya's cold body and crying uncontrollably. "She's gone, my daughter is gone," she wailed. Philo stood in the corner, shaking, her eyes fixed on Ochanya's still face. Her heart refused to believe it. Only an hour ago, she had been whispering prayers beside her. Now she was gone. Silas stood by the door, pale and trembling. He looked like he wanted to run, but his feet wouldn't move. Otukpo stood behind everyone, pretending to console his wife. "It's okay, dear. God gives and takes," he said softly. But Philo saw the emptiness in his eyes. There was no grief there, no pain. Only fear of what might come next. The neighbors murmured among themselves. "She was so young," one woman said. "Did she have any sickness?" Cecilia couldn't answer. She just kept crying. Someone suggested taking the body to the hospital immediately for confirmation, and a few men helped carry her to a nearby clinic. The nurse on duty checked and confirmed what everyone feared. Ochanya was dead. Cecilia broke down again, screaming and holding her chest. Philo clung to her, crying too. When they returned home, the compound felt heavier than ever before. The air was filled with sorrow and whispers. By morning, the whole street had heard the news. That little girl from Otukpo, the one staying with the Otukpos, she died last night. But whispers don't stop at sadness. Soon they turned to suspicion. "She was fine last week," someone said. "How did she die so suddenly?" another added. Cecilia couldn't sit still. She kept asking questions no one could answer. Why did she suffer so much? Why didn't the medicine help? Her mind was in chaos. She decided that she would take her body back to the village for burial. It was the right thing to do. But inside, something told her this was not an ordinary death. That morning, she called her brother from the village, Uncle Jonah, and told him what happened. "We'll come tomorrow," he said over the phone, his voice calm but firm. "We will bury her properly." When Cecilia hung up, she turned to her husband. "You will come with me to the village," she said. Otukpo hesitated but agreed. He knew refusing would look suspicious. That evening, Philo sat alone behind the house, staring at the empty sky. Silas joined her quietly. "Stop crying," he said softly. "It's over now." Philo turned to him sharply. "Over? She's dead, Silas. Because of you." He flinched. "Don't say that." "You think I don't know?" she continued, her voice shaking with rage. "You started this. You and Daddy." Silas stood up, fear flashing in his eyes. "Keep your voice down. You want to destroy this family?" Philo's eyes filled with tears. "You already did," she said and ran inside. That night, Cecilia couldn't sleep. She tossed and turned, her mind filled with images of Ochanya's face. Around midnight, she heard footsteps in the corridor. She sat up, listening. The steps stopped near the front door, then continued outside. She peeped through the curtain and saw her husband carrying a small sack, walking quickly toward the bush path behind the house. Her heart raced. What was he doing at that hour? She wanted to follow him, but fear held her back. She decided she would ask him in the morning. By dawn, Otukpo was already sitting outside, pretending to read his Bible. When Cecilia asked where he went last night, he smiled calmly. "I went to pray for her soul," he said. "You were asleep, and I didn't want to wake you." Cecilia frowned but said nothing. Around noon, her brother arrived from the village with 2 men. They were quiet, their faces hard. They wrapped Ochanya's body in white cloth and placed her in the van. Cecilia followed them, with Philo beside her. Otukpo and Silas came too. The road to Otukpo was long and dusty. No one spoke throughout the journey. Philo held her mother's hand tightly, staring out the window as trees rushed by. When they arrived, the villagers gathered quickly. Women wailed loudly, and Ochanya's mother collapsed when she saw her daughter's body. "What happened to my child?" she cried. "She was fine when she left here." Cecilia couldn't answer. She just wept with her. The burial was fixed for the next day. But that night, while everyone slept in the compound, a quiet meeting was held under the mango tree. Ochanya's uncle, Jonah, and 2 elders sat with Cecilia. "We need to know the truth," Jonah said firmly. "That child's death doesn't look natural." Cecilia's lips trembled. "The doctor said she had an infection." Jonah frowned. "What kind of infection kills a child in 2 weeks? There's more to this, Cecilia." Cecilia lowered her head. Tears fell onto her lap. "I don't know," she whispered. "I truly don't know." But deep down, her heart was screaming that she did know, that she had seen the signs but ignored them. The next morning, during the burial, the villagers noticed something strange. As they lowered the body into the ground, a woman standing nearby fainted. She later said she saw Ochanya's spirit standing beside the grave, weeping. The crowd gasped, murmuring prayers and crossing themselves. After the burial, Jonah turned to Otukpo. "We will not let this end here," he said coldly. "We will find out what really killed her." Otukpo smiled faintly and replied, "You can try." That evening, as they prepared to leave the village, Cecilia sat in silence, holding Philo's hand. "Mama," Philo whispered, "if I tell you something, will you believe me?" Cecilia looked at her, confused. "What is it?" Philo hesitated, her eyes filling with tears. "It's about Daddy and Silas." Cecilia's blood ran cold. She felt her hands go numb. "What about them?" Philo's lips quivered. "They hurt Ochanya. I saw it." Cecilia froze. For a moment, the world around her disappeared. Her mind went blank. Her breath caught in her throat. She stared at her daughter, unable to speak. And then, slowly, anger began to rise inside her like fire. Cecilia sat frozen, her eyes wide in disbelief. "Philo," she whispered, her voice trembling. "What did you just say?" Philo broke down, tears spilling down her cheeks. "Mama, it's true," she said, her words shaking. "Silas started it, and Daddy joined him later. I saw everything." For a long moment, silence hung in the air, heavy and cold. The sounds of crickets filled the night, but Cecilia could no longer hear them. Her heart pounded in her chest, each beat echoing like thunder. "You saw your father?" she asked again, her voice faint. Philo nodded slowly. "That night you went to the burial in Gboko. Silas called her into his room. I didn't know what he was doing until I saw it with my own eyes. When I told you he hurt her, Daddy told us to keep quiet. Then later, he started doing it too." Cecilia's hand flew to her mouth. She stood up quickly, her legs weak beneath her. She stumbled a few steps, holding onto the wall to steady herself. Tears filled her eyes, but they weren't just tears of sorrow. They were tears of rage. "How could he?" she muttered. "How could the man I trusted, the man I built my life with, do this?" Philo sobbed harder. "I was scared, Mama. He told me not to tell anyone or he would hurt me too." Cecilia knelt and pulled her daughter close, her body trembling. "No one will hurt you again, my child," she said firmly. "Not while I'm alive." That night, Cecilia didn't sleep. She sat outside the hut in Ogbedibo, staring into the darkness, her mind burning. Every memory of Otukpo, the smiles, the prayers, the family dinners, turned bitter in her mouth. She finally understood the coldness in his eyes, the fear in Ochanya's silence. When morning came, she went to her brother Jonah's house. "I know what killed her," she said, her voice hoarse. Jonah frowned. "What do you mean?" Cecilia told him everything. Every secret, every night, every cry. Jonah's face darkened with anger. "This is evil," he said, slamming his palm on the table. "We can't keep quiet. He must face justice." "But we have no proof," Cecilia said weakly. "Ochanya is gone." Jonah stood up. "The hospital has records, and the truth always finds its way out." They decided to return to Otukpo the next day. Jonah promised to come with her. He was not going to let this be swept under the carpet. When they arrived home, Otukpo was sitting in the compound, pretending to read his newspaper. He looked up and smiled. "You're back. How was the burial?" Cecilia stared at him coldly. "It was peaceful," she said slowly. "But we found something you didn't expect." His smile faded. "What do you mean?" "You'll soon find out," she replied and walked inside. That night, she gathered courage and confronted Silas. "Look at me," she said sharply. "Tell me the truth. What did you do to that girl?" Silas looked terrified. "Mama, I didn't mean to. It was a mistake," he cried. "A mistake?" she shouted. "You destroyed her life, Silas. You took her innocence. And now she's dead because of you and your father." Silas fell to his knees crying. "Daddy told me not to tell anyone. He said he would handle it." Cecilia's eyes filled with tears again, but this time, she didn't cry. She turned and walked out. Her decision was made. She would report them both. The next morning, she dressed quietly and left the house before sunrise. She went straight to the Women's Center in Makurdi, where she met with a social welfare officer named Mrs. Ruiz. "Madam," she said in a shaking voice, "I need help. My husband and son abused a 13-year-old girl who lived with us. She died because of it." Mrs. Ruiz stared at her in shock. "Are you sure about this?" "I'm sure," Cecilia said firmly. "I can't carry this secret anymore." The officer took notes and promised to start an investigation immediately. She asked for the hospital's name and the doctor's details. Cecilia gave everything she could remember. "Please," she said softly, "don't let him know yet. He's dangerous." By evening, the whispers had already begun spreading. The doctor from Makurdi had confirmed that a case had been reopened. The report of a minor with severe injuries was now under review. When Otukpo came home that night, he sensed something was wrong. Cecilia was cold and quiet. Philo refused to come out of her room, and Silas sat in the corner, trembling. "Why is everyone behaving strange?" Otukpo asked, narrowing his eyes. "Cecilia, is there something you want to say?" She looked at him with a calmness he didn't expect. "You'll soon find out," she said simply. For the first time, Otukpo felt uneasy. That night he didn't sleep. He paced around the sitting room, trying to think of what to do. He knew the truth was closing in. The next morning, two men arrived at the gate, a police officer and a woman from the welfare department. "We are looking for Mr. Otukpo," the officer said. Philo watched from behind the curtain as her father stepped out. "Yes, that's me," he said cautiously. The officer handed him a paper. "You're invited for questioning concerning the death of a minor who lived in your house." Otukpo's face went pale. "What nonsense is this?" he snapped. "Who's accusing me?" Cecilia stepped out slowly from behind the door. "I did," she said in a steady voice. Otukpo turned to her, eyes wide. "You? You dare accuse me?" Cecilia's eyes burned with fury. "You're not a man, Otukpo. You're a monster." The officer stepped forward. "Sir, you'll need to come with us." As they led him away, neighbors began to gather, whispering and pointing. Silas stood frozen, his face white as chalk. Philo hid behind her mother, trembling. But as the police van drove away, Otukpo turned and shouted, "This isn't over. Cecilia, you'll regret this." His words hung in the air like a curse. That night, the compound was silent. Cecilia sat alone on the veranda, the wind brushing against her face. For the first time in months, she felt a strange mix of pain and relief. She had done what was right, but she also knew that this was only the beginning. Because even behind bars, evil has a way of finding its way back home. The days that followed were heavy with tension. The story of what happened inside the Otukpo home spread across Otukpo like wildfire. People whispered in the markets, in churches, at school gates. Some pitied Cecilia, others blamed her for not noticing sooner. But one thing everyone agreed on was that justice had to be served. Otukpo sat in a small police cell in Makurdi, staring at the cracked wall. The arrogance he once carried was gone. Each passing hour reminded him that his secret life of darkness had finally caught up with him. He thought about the night they came for him, the look on Cecilia's face, and for the first time, Fear began to creep into his heart. At home, Cecilia tried to stay strong for Philo, but the pain was deep. Sometimes she would sit alone at night and cry silently. "Why did I bring that poor child into our home?" she would whisper. All she wanted was to go to school. Philo, too, carried her guilt like a shadow. She blamed herself for not speaking sooner, for not saving Ochanya when she still had the chance. Her nights were filled with nightmares, her days with silence. Silas avoided both of them, staying mostly in his room, afraid of what was coming. 2 weeks later, the case was taken to court. The medical report confirmed everything Cecilia had said. The evidence was clear. Ochanya had been assaulted repeatedly, and her death was a result of untreated infections caused by that abuse. The court was filled with journalists, women's groups, and angry townspeople demanding justice. When Otukpo was brought in, he tried to look calm, but his eyes darted nervously around the room. Silas was beside him, trembling. Cecilia sat in the front row, holding Philo's hand tightly. The judge's voice echoed through the courtroom. "Mr. Otukpo, you stand accused of violating and assaulting a minor who was under your care, leading to her death. How do you plead?" Otukpo swallowed hard. "Not guilty," he said quickly, his voice shaking. A murmur ran through the crowd. Cecilia's eyes filled with tears. She could not believe he was still lying, even now. The prosecutor presented the evidence, the hospital reports, Philo's statement, and the doctor's testimony. Each word pierced the room like a blade. The more the truth unfolded, the more Otukpo's mask crumbled. Silas broke down completely. When it was his turn to speak, he couldn't hold back his tears. "I'm sorry," he cried. "It's true. I did it. But Daddy made me keep quiet. He said no one would believe us." Gasps filled the courtroom. Cecilia covered her face and wept quietly. The judge banged his gavel for silence. "Enough," he said sternly. Otukpo turned to Silas with rage in his eyes. "You foolish boy. You think this will save you?" he shouted. But the officers quickly restrained him. When the hearing ended, the judge announced that the final verdict would come in 2 weeks. As they led Otukpo away, he glared at Cecilia and said in a low voice, "You destroyed this family." Cecilia didn't respond. She just looked at him with calm, tear-filled eyes. "No," she said softly. "You destroyed it yourself." That evening, as they returned home, Philo sat quietly in the back seat of the car. She looked out the window at the streets of Makurdi, the setting sun painting the sky orange and red. "Mama," she said suddenly, "will he ever change?" Cecilia sighed. "I don't know, my daughter, but people like him rarely do. What matters now is that the truth is out, and Ochanya will finally rest." A few days later, something unexpected happened. Cecilia received a letter from Ochanya's mother. It read, "Sister Cecilia, I forgive you. I know you didn't know the evil that was happening in your home. My daughter is gone, but I take comfort knowing that someone stood up for her in the end. May God bless you and your child for speaking the truth." Cecilia read the letter several times, her hands trembling. It was the first time she had felt peace since the tragedy began. She folded the letter carefully and placed it beside her Bible. Weeks later, the verdict came. The courtroom was silent as the judge read it aloud. "Mr. Otukpo and his son, Silas, are found guilty of the crimes of assault, rape, and manslaughter. The court hereby sentences Mr. Otukpo to life imprisonment and his son, Silas, to 15 years in prison." The sound of the gavel echoed through the hall. Cecilia closed her eyes and whispered a prayer. It wasn't joy she felt, but relief. A deep, aching relief that justice had finally been done. Outside the court, journalists surrounded her. "Madam Cecilia," one of them asked, "what message do you have for parents watching this?" She looked straight into the camera and spoke with steady emotion. "Parents, please watch your children. Evil doesn't always come from strangers. Sometimes it hides inside the people we trust most. Talk to your children, listen to them, protect them. Don't wait until it's too late." Her words traveled far beyond Otukpo. Churches, schools, and radio stations across Benue echoed her message. People began to talk more openly about child protection and abuse. What happened to Ochanya became a lesson for many families. Months later, Cecilia moved with Philo to Makurdi to start over. Life wasn't easy, but it was peaceful. Philo returned to school, determined to study law. "I want to fight for people like Ochanya," she told her mother one morning as they sat by the window. Cecilia smiled weakly. "Then her death will not be in vain." The camera would fade slowly if this were a film, showing a quiet Benue sunrise, a small house in Makurdi, and a mother and daughter rebuilding their lives one day at a time. But before the credits rolled, a single reminder would appear on the screen. "Parents, please watch this before it's too late."